Thank you so much, Selena. Thank you very much for that. I find I need to be silent for a little while. Okay, I managed about 12 seconds of silence before it got too much for me and I discovered I had to fill the space with words again. But the reason why I felt I needed to be silent, at least for those few seconds, to make myself stop talking, even though I'm chairing this session, I'm supposed to be here introducing things, saying things to you, was because of what Selena was saying about spaces and privilege and oppression. We hear a lot about privilege in today's society in all sorts of ways. But I was thinking, as Selena was talking about privileged stories, those stories which overwrite the stories of others, and sometimes with the best will in the world, because we think we can say it better, and we think that we can express it in a way that people will understand better. But we nonetheless overwrite other people's stories and oversay other people's stories. It's one of the things that Jesus doesn't do. He permits the stories of others, those people who have things to say but are least able to do so, to speak, to tell their stories, to express them, not necessarily in words, and to be fully participant members of the kingdom of God by so doing. And this reminds me that we have to be more careful about the stories we tell about others, who we silence by so doing. And that seems to me something very important that we learned about the way that Selena was talking about Scripture. And similarly, it's so difficult, it was really difficult in those few seconds to say, you may speak, but I will be silent. I will not interrupt, I will not interject, I will not put it a better way for you. But how hard that is. How hard when it is our job to preach the gospel, to speak the good news of Jesus, to be silent and allow Jesus to speak back to us through the stories of others. And on that note, I want to introduce our next speaker, Mark Russell, who is going to talk about the members of our societies that are so often not allowed to speak for themselves, about whom we speak, over whom we speak, and for whom we are always saying, we will tell you what to say. Building a society for all children. Thank you, Mark.
Good morning. 141 years ago in the parish of St. Anne and All Saints in Vauxhall was a young Sunday school teacher called Edward Rudolph, who noticed two wee boys were missing from his Sunday school class, and he went to find them. He found them on a street corner of South London begging for food. It turned out their dad had just died, mum had no money, and had sent them out to beg for food. It was Steve Jobs who founded the Apple empire that said some of the world's greatest vision is born in the greatest anger. It's only truly when we're angry about something that we desperately work out what needs to change. I believe that moment something flipped inside Edward Rudolph's head and he was filled with anger, righteous anger, that children were sitting on the streets of London begging for food, and he stormed off to Lambeth Palace and banged the door, was allowed in and was granted an audience with the Archbishop of Canterbury. He said, "Archbishop, we need to do something. There are children literally on the streets of this city begging for food." And the Archbishop said, "You do something." And that is the second the Children's Society was born. We weren't called the Children's Society back then. We were called the Society of Waifs and Strays. We have subsequently rebranded over the years. But I like to think that that same restless anger, that life is just too hard for too many children, drives everything that this organization does. We are filled with a deep conviction, as I suspect, I hope all of us are, that every child deserves to live in a decent home, surrounded by people who love them, to have enough food on the table, to be free of abuse and exploitation and neglect, that no child in 21st century Britain should need a food bank or a professional inspirational footballer to ensure they have enough to eat. And what I want to do in my little slot this morning is to share some of the challenges that face children in the 21st century. I want to share a little bit about what the team I lead are doing about it, and how I believe, thirdly, you, as Cathedrals, can help us truly build a society for all children. Now, many of you will know that for 15 years we've been researching children's well-being and children's happiness. We conduct the single biggest piece of research into children's feelings in the whole of the United Kingdom. The Good Childhood Report is important because it's not a bunch of experts or academics second-guessing how children think or feel. The Good Childhood Report is the voice of children themselves. It is the voice of thousands and thousands of children telling us how life is. And we ask children questions on 10 different areas of their lives, like their home life, or their family, or school, or money, or their appearance. So what are we finding in our research? Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have published this report for over a decade, and we're about to publish our 11th. And every single year we have published this report, we have shown that children's well-being and children's happiness is getting worse. Every single year. Every single year that passes, more and more children in this country are deeply unhappy. When I say that, what I mean is this. I'm not saying children are having a bad day or just struggling this week. When I say the number of children who are deeply unhappy has doubled in the last decade, I am saying that the number of young people who report as being deeply unhappy in every single one of the 10 areas of their lives we ask them questions on, that number has doubled in 10 years, from 172,000 to 306,000. Last year, we reported that children in the United Kingdom have the lowest well-being and the lowest happiness in all Europe. I think that's something that should fill us with shame. We have the most unhappy children in the whole of Europe. And I asked our team to work out why that was. And we landed on 2 reasons. Number 1, children in the United Kingdom are more scared of failure than children in other countries in Europe. Whether that's our education system that focuses assessment and attainment on 1 or 2 key moments in a child's life, whether that's the news that says that the average house price is 12 times the average salary. Children in this country are telling us in large numbers they are scared, they don't think they're going to have enough money to have somewhere to live, they're scared they're not going to have a decent enough job, and, to build on what the former Prime Minister said yesterday, they're scared about the future of this country, A, in terms of climate change, and B, in terms of Brexit. So that's the first reason we have the worst well-being in Europe. Children are more frightened of failure in Britain. And secondly, we have the highest levels of child poverty in all of Europe. 3.9 million children in this country are living in poverty. 3.9. Ladies and gentlemen, that is an outrage, a scandal, and a national disgrace. And that's why I asked that question yesterday. Child poverty has a corrosive impact on children's lives. And we know that children absorb the feelings of their parents. Our Friends Action for Children have published research this morning that shows over half of children in low-income families are worried about money. So we have the worst levels of child poverty, and children are more scared of failure. Well, we've also known for many, many years that children struggle with their appearance. And we've known for many years that girls more than boys struggle with their appearance. In the last 3 years, we've seen that gap narrow massively. So now that boys and girls equally are worried about their appearance and how they look. Whether that's social media or peer pressure or other factors, too many children are unhappy with how they look and how they present themselves to the world. But the other important piece of research we published last year was that we know from our research that children with low well-being at the ages of 11 and 14 are substantially more likely to have serious mental health issues by the age of 17. Now, when I'm talking serious mental health, and I hope this isn't a trigger, but I'm talking about self-harm or attempts at taking their own life. So low well-being at 14 is an indicator absolute indicator of serious mental health issues at 17. What we know from all of our research and from all of our practice is if we can help those young people at 14, if we can get them low-level early help, we can turn that around. The problem is the government have cut early help by 50% over the last decade. So now all of our mental health resources are going to the crisis end when young people are absolutely in dark, dark places. So all of our research shows the importance of intervening early. On my desk at home, a desk I saw a lot more of over the last couple of years than I expected to see, on my desk at home is a quote from an American philosopher from the 17th century called Frederick Douglass. He said, "It is much better for society to build stronger children than fix broken adults." And all of the research we've done doesn't even begin to touch on the impact of 2 years of COVID on children. I suspect our report this year will give us some clues on that. From schools being closed to loss of contact with children and families and friends, too many young people trapped with those who harm them and abuse them. It will take years to work out the impact of COVID on children. So the situation is bleak, frankly, for too many children in this country. So what is the organization I have the honor of leading doing about it? Well, ladies and gentlemen, the research that we produce disturbs me. It angers me. And I am appalled that life is just too hard for too many children. The government have published their levelling up strategy, which I think in principle is right. But what is the metric for children's levelling up? GCSE maths and English grades. I'm trying to persuade Michael Gove that the true metric for levelling up is the happiness of children. That if we got to 2030 and kids in this country were happier than they are now, that would be levelling up. If you agree with me, send them an email and tell them to back that plan. Because I believe passionately if children live in a decent home and have enough food on the table and are not worried and are happier and more hopeful, I think they'll do better at school and he'll still get his GCSE maths and English grades. So this research has so troubled us at the Children's Society that we've turned it into a goal. And I hope it's a goal you'll want to cheer us on and help us deliver. Our goal is that by 2030, we want children to be happier in this country. By 2030, the Children's Society's goal is that we will have overturned this decades-long decline in children's happiness and that children will be happier by the end of this decade. And what I want to challenge you to do is to help us make that happen. I have the privilege of leading one of the largest charities in the country. And let me tell you what we're doing about this on 3 different levels, or 3 concentric circles. Not wishing to name drop. I said to the Queen last Friday, I never name drop. But not wishing to name drop. I had the privilege of showing the late, great Desmond Tutu around a homeless project that Church Army runs in London. And Desmond said something that deeply affected me. He said, "What you're doing here is so important because you're fishing drowning women out of a river." He said, "But what you have to do, Mark, is you have to go further upstream and find out how they fell into the river in the first place or who pushed them and stop it happening." And that's what the Children's Society is trying to do. So the river, pulling people out, is our first phase of our work. And I know for many years people thought the Children's Society was stepping back from services. I can tell you that on my watch we have doubled our frontline footprint over the last number of years, and we're now working with 50,000 young people every year directly. Whether that's through our mental health and well-being services that young people can access, whether that's supporting families in poverty or asylum-seeking children or young carers, or whether that's keeping children safe and running programs that help young people facing abuse or sexual exploitation, and our groundbreaking national programs that seek to disrupt county lines and the criminal abuse of young people. So our first level is we're working directly with 50,000 young people every year. And what we then do at the next level, the next concentric circle, is take all of the learning from that work and work out how do we stop other young people falling into that situation. So we work with our teams to develop resources to train professionals in schools, the police, the National Health Service, to try and support children through prevention work. And I'm very proud of this. Our prevention work this year so far has reached 750,000 children. So we're working directly with 50,000 young people, and our prevention work is reaching 750,000 children. But then what we want to do is we want to turn that into systemic change that impacts every young person, informing our policy work, our campaigning work, and our advocacy work. We are trusted by government and trusted by ministers to speak truth to power and to bring wisdom into the room. I'll give you 2 examples of our systems-changing work that I'm really proud of. Number 1, we know that more children who are in the care system end up homeless than any other group of young people. Because young people are staying living with parents way into their 20s because they can't afford housing in this country. But what do you do if you've grown up in care? You don't have that structure, which is why more children from care end up homeless. So we took that into a campaign to persuade the government to increase housing benefit as part of universal credit for care leavers. And we succeeded. And the Minister for Welfare agreed to our request, and now every care leaver aged 18 to 25 has significantly higher levels of housing benefit thanks to the work of the Children's Society. And secondly, and I'm really proud of this, a young person in a youth group in Manchester told one of my team that his mum had gone into debt with a loan shark to pay for his school uniform. Another young person in another service told us he'd been excluded from school because he wasn't wearing the right blazer because his mum couldn't afford it, and he'd been picked up by criminals and drawn into a gang. That started a campaign that the Children's Society ran for 6 years called Cut the Cost. Many of you probably got involved in haranguing your MP to do something about school uniform, because we know that the average cost of uniform for a child in Britain is £346. What do you do if you've got 3 kids and your own benefits? Mike Amesbury, the Labour MP for Weaverville, topped the poll in the private members' ballot of the House of Commons, and one of my team rung him and said, "Do you fancy picking up school uniform?" He said, "Sure." So the Children's Society wrote the bill, the school uniform bill, and the accompanying parliamentary guidance. It went to the floor of the Commons and it passed its first reading. Now, as you probably know, private members' bills have got zilch chance of ever becoming law, unless the government back them. So I went to see Gavin Williamson and Nick Gibb, the schools minister. And I said, "Minister, it can't be right that parents are choosing schools on the basis of the cheapest blazer, can it?" "No, of course not." "Well, they are." He went, "What do we want to do about it?" I said, "Minister, just back our bill." To my astonishment, he looked at me and goes, "Okay." Oh my goodness, okay. So I'm back to the office. The government are going to back the bill. What? Yes, honestly. So the bill cleared the second reading of the House of Commons, and it's got to go through in 12 months. And then the Brexit bill hit the floor of Parliament, and the parliamentary schedule went haywire. And we saw our bill running out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, don't quote me on this, but I never expected to say these words. I am very grateful to Jacob Rees-Mogg. I wrote to him and said, "Minister, my bill is going to fall off of the edge of the parliamentary schedule. Can you help me?" He wrote to me and said, "Yes, we can do this." And so the bill cleared the House of Commons. It went to the Lords and cleared the Lords in 48 hours. I hope you voted for it, Bishop Michael. Cleared the Lords in 48 hours, and Her Majesty the Queen signed it into law 3 days before the parliamentary session ended last April. The Children's Society changed the law on school uniform. Every family in England will have their uniform bills cut by 1/3 from the 1st of September this year, thanks to 2 children who told us about their experience. So that's what we try and do, take the voices of children and lead to systemic change. I haven't got time to even tell you about the changes to the law on domestic abuse, where now we have ensured that children are seen as victims in their own right of domestic abuse and not as observers. Massive step forward for safeguarding. So the Children's Society is doing our level best to change this situation. But what is the big change we want to see? We want a society that works for all children, not just a few. We need to reverse the decade-long cuts in children's services, where the government have taken $2 billion out of work with children and young people. It's a fool's economy, storing up a crisis for the future. We need a strategy to fight poverty. As the cost of living bites, poverty will get worse. I remember, I think it was Billy Connolly who said a sign of getting old was shouting at the television. Well, I did that last week at Question Time. I watched somebody talk about poverty, and I watched the minister say, the solution to poverty is we need to get people back into work. And I'm yelling at my television, read your own statistics. 75% of all families in poverty are in work. We need a solution for poverty. And I was glad John Major answered my question that poverty needs cross-party agreement. So I'm going to write him a letter and ask him if he'll help me make that happen. We need our care system to work for children. Josh McAllister's about to publish his care review, and we've worked really closely with him and hope we can take radical reform that our care system will deliver the outcomes for those most vulnerable children. We need to fight racism and prejudice wherever we find it. We know that black children are more likely to live in poor housing, have lower educational attainment, have bad experiences with justice, and we need to level up for all young people of colour. And frankly, most of all, we just need our government to have an idea about children. Governments see children as 3 Ps: pupils, patients, and prisoners. We need a strategy for good childhood in this country. What does it mean for children to flourish in 21st century Britain? So where do you come in? It is a privilege for me to be with you today, and thank you for allowing me to rant at you for a few minutes. I passionately believe in cathedrals. I've been a cathedral canon in Worcester, and on Sunday just past, I had the honour of being installed as a canon of Southwark. Cathedrals, yes indeed, cathedrals have a massive presence. Literally, they're big, impressive buildings at the centre of cities and towns. They're the mother churches of their dioceses, and cathedrals have huge convening power. So I want to challenge you in your discussion sessions that you're about to go into. How can your cathedral address the questions of injustice that face too many children? Could your cathedral put your hand up and say, we will work with you at the Children's Society to fight this decline in children's happiness, to be part of our movement for change? One of my favorite passages in the Bible is in Luke chapter 4, when Jesus stands up in the synagogue and unravels the scroll of the prophet Isaiah and says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoner and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free and proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And then, in a moment of dramatic flourish, he says, "In your midst this day, that scripture has been fulfilled." I often think if that was an episode of EastEnders, that would be the dum, 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 dum moment. Because social justice was the heart of the ministry of Jesus of Nazareth, and it must be the heart of ours. Transformation of our society and transformation of our world. And I believe that children's lives are at the heart of that. I know God doesn't have favorites, but I'm pretty sure if he did, the most vulnerable children in this country would be his favorites. So how can your cathedral fight for justice for children, to fight for children's happiness and flourishing? Well, I suggest that people can walk into your cathedrals in a way that they don't often walk into parish churches. In my last job at Church Army, I used to often say to clergy that people feel parish churches are a bit like private members' clubs. They're very glad they're there, but they don't feel that they belong or can go. But I suspect people do feel they can wander into a cathedral, which makes you a crossroads for your community and a real potential to be a gathering place for communities. You can put on events, invite speakers, invite your MP, invite young people to put these issues on the radar of your cathedral, to open up debate and galvanize support, to be passionate about changing the world for children. You can join us in our campaigns to use your voice and the voices of your cathedral colleagues to campaign for systemic change. Bluntly, we have to find around £40 million to make this organisation work, and many of you in this room support us, and I'm hugely grateful. But if you were able to run a Christingle service or hold an event or help us raise that cash so that we can do more to help children? And could you use your estate, your buildings, to make a difference for children? I had the privilege of being in Lichfield a few weeks ago, and Dean Adrian showed me the building next to the cathedral that he has a dream of turning into an open access mental health hub for young people, and we're going to try and work with him to make that happen. So in your discussion, how can you help transform children's lives? We cannot do what we do without you. And there are 3 of my brilliant colleagues in the room over the course of these few days. We've got Kevin and Jill and Tom, and please do talk to them about how you can partner with us. I am proud that the Children's Society and the Church have been partners for 141 years. We are still legally the Church of England Children's Society. And for me personally, I believe this work is a vocation, a calling. It's the very work of God himself to change the world for children. Children like Taylor. Taylor's mum was in and out of hospital all her life. She was suffering from severe mental health issues. And when Taylor was just 11, her mum was permanently sectioned. Dad wasn't around, so Taylor moved in with her grandparents. Just a few weeks after she moved in with her grandparents, her granddad died. And Taylor was in this vortex of sadness and loss and abandonment and grief. Taylor was desperate for love and affection and belonging. And it wasn't long before manipulative people started to take advantage of her. She was in a relationship with a boy that quickly turned toxic. He was manipulative, he was controlling, he was abusive. He got her involved in stuff she didn't want to do. She started missing school, she was sleeping all day, she was drinking too much, she was taking drugs, trying to numb what she was feeling. Her life was in a complete spinning out of control, and she didn't know how to stop. Taylor attempted to take her own life and ended up in the same mental health unit as her mum. Whilst she was there, one of the team told her about the Children's Society and the support we can offer. And Taylor visited our service and she met my colleague Gemma. And Gemma worked with Taylor for years. This is not short-term stuff, it's long-term. She worked with her for years and helped her process the things in her life. Taylor says, Gemma gave me hope and showed me that there's light in the tunnel. Today, Taylor is 24. She's come a long way. You'd never know from meeting this chatty, confident young woman where she's come from. And that is the difference that the Children's Society makes. Long-term investment in helping to change the world one young person at a time. Taylor now wants to be a Children's Society project worker, and I hope to heck she is. A number of years ago, I read an article by a writer called Rebecca Solnit. I used to think I was a feminist. She's a feminist. I used to think I was an optimist. And growing up in Northern Ireland, you have to be. But Solnit argues that optimists and pessimists have one thing in common. They both believe they don't have to do anything at all. The optimist doesn't do anything because the world will always get better. And the pessimist doesn't because it will always get worse. Rebecca Solnit argues that the world is only ever changed by hope-filled people. I've never heard a better definition of the people of God in all my life. Hope-filled people who dare to believe that their words, their actions, their behavior, their voice, their money, and their presence can change the world. So I challenge you to join me in being a hope-filled person. To dare to believe that every child deserves the best possible start in life, regardless of their postcode or their parents' income. That they should have a decent life and be the ability to be whoever they want to be free from prejudice and racism, to walk tall and reach their dreams. Until that day, I promise you with every sinew of my being that the Children's Society will work tirelessly to build that society. We will speak up and we will speak out, even when it's uncomfortable, to help build a society for all children, where every child can thrive, not just survive. And I hope you'll join us on that journey. Thank you for listening.